In 1986, a chilling revelation sent shockwaves through the FBI's Soviet counterintelligence section in Washington. Two of their most prized Soviet informants, Valery Martinov and Sergei Motorin, had been compromised. Once exposed, both men were summoned back to Moscow, where they were swiftly and brutally executed, each dispatched with a single bullet to the head, the KGB's grim calling card for traitors. Within the FBI, the pair were known affectionately as M and M, and their loss marked an abrupt end to what had become routine cover meetings and intelligence exchanges. At the same time, across the Potomac in Langley, the CIA was grappling with its own nightmare. Over the years, dozens of CIA operatives operating inside the Soviet Union had suddenly gone dark. Some were arrested, others were imprisoned. Many were executed. Panic spread quietly through the upper ranks of American intelligence. Something was terribly wrong. The FBI hastily assembled an elite investigative team to unravel the mystery. Yet as months turned into years and no clear answers emerged, an unsettling possibility began to linger in the air like a bad smell. The traitor might be one of their own. Determined to root out the mole, veteran analysts in the FBI's Soviet unit combed through mountains of debriefings and reports, searching for patterns, any clue that could expose the betrayer. Their focus eventually narrowed onto an innocent man. Meanwhile, the true culprit carried on undetected. He was a devout Catholic, a loving husband, a father of 6, and a trusted FBI agent. Beneath that respectable exterior, he harbored a dangerous secret. Robert Philip Hansen's decades-long path of betrayal would ultimately be judged the worst intelligence disaster in FBI history. This is his story. Thank you all for clicking on this video. I want to extend special thanks to my viewers, dedicated subscribers, and the incredible members and supporters over on my Buy Me a Coffee page. Your support motivates me to keep bringing you these spy stories. If you enjoy this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to help the channel grow. Life began for Robert Hansen on April 18, 1944, in a suburb of Chicago near O'Hare Airport. He was born to Howard and Vivian Hansen, a working-class Christian couple who, by all outward appearances, represented the ideal American family. Howard had served in the U.S. Navy during World War II before embarking on a career as a police officer with the Chicago Police Department. Vivian, like many women of her generation, stayed home to raise their child. Howard Hansen was a stern disciplinarian. His punishments were harsh and often cruel. Robert later endured experiences that bordered on sadistic, being rolled tightly inside an old Navy mattress until he panicked, or spun repeatedly until he became violently ill. These punishments, Howard claimed, were meant to toughen his son. But Howard was not only strict, he was emotionally distant. He belittled Robert frequently, leaving scars that ran far deeper than the physical. Despite the abuse, Robert developed a complicated and persistent desire for his father's approval. He was an only child and attended public schools. At William Howard Taft High School, he befriended Jack Hoschauer, who would remain his closest friend for the rest of his life. The two graduated together in 1962. And spent their spare time racing their parents' cars through neighborhood streets, dreaming of becoming Formula One drivers. After high school, Robert enrolled at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois. He majored in chemistry and, in an ironic twist of fate, also took Russian language courses. Howard wanted his son to become a doctor, hoping he would achieve more than a career in law enforcement. During summer breaks, Robert worked at a state psychiatric hospital in Chicago as a recreational therapist. He later convinced Jack to join him there. It was at the hospital that Robert met Bernadette Walk, known to everyone as Bonnie. She was intelligent, attractive, and deeply religious. Coming from a devout Roman Catholic family with close ties to Opus Dei, a conservative Catholic institution that taught holiness could be achieved through ordinary life. Bonnie was raised in Park Ridge, an affluent Chicago suburb that emphasized education and religious devotion. The couple were dating when Robert graduated in 1966. Pursuing his father's ambitions for him, he enrolled in Northwestern University's dental school. While studying dentistry, Robert acquired a nickname that would follow him for years: the Mortician. He wore a dark suit and tie no matter the occasion, an outfit that mirrored both his somber demeanor and physical appearance. Standing 6'3" and walking with an awkward lurch, he rarely socialized with classmates, instead preferring solitary lunches or the company of women he quietly pursued. 2 years later, Robert dropped out of dental school, increasingly drawn toward a career in law enforcement like his father's. Throughout this period, his relationship with Bonnie continued on and off. In 1968, they decided to marry. Though the wedding nearly collapsed weeks beforehand when Bonnie received a disturbing phone call from a woman claiming to be Robert's girlfriend. Robert admitted to cheating, but after emotional reconciliation, the couple went through with the wedding. Shortly after marrying, Robert converted to Catholicism. This was no superficial change. He immersed himself deeply in the faith, attending Mass regularly, and becoming an active member of Opus Dei. His devotion was intense, and he often encouraged friends and colleagues to attend church meetings with him. In the early years of their marriage, Bonnie worked as a grade school teacher while Robert enrolled part-time in an MBA program. He also joined the Chicago Police Department following in his father's footsteps, later serving in internal affairs as a forensic accounting investigator. Howard had mixed feelings about Robert joining the force, but eventually gifted him his police-issued firearm as a sign of approval. In the early 1970s, as America was embroiled in the Vietnam War, Jack Hoshauer left to fight overseas. Though separated for a time, Robert's interactions during this period and afterward would later reveal a darker, more disturbing side of his personality. After earning his MBA, Robert Hansen set his sights on something bigger. On January 12, 1976, Robert Hansen became a special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. His first assignment was the FBI's field office in Gary, Indiana, where he specialized in white-collar crime. He quickly demonstrated skill as a forensic accountant. In 1978, he was transferred to the FBI's New York office. There, Hansen found the work dull and unfulfilling. He wanted more. That desire would soon place him on a path from which there was no return. Money was certainly a factor in Hansen's return to espionage, but it was not the only one. Those who later studied his behavior believed that low self-esteem played a decisive role. Hansen craved recognition he felt the FBI denied him. He considered himself the smartest man in any room he entered and resented watching others rise faster through the ranks. His fascination with espionage never faded. At times, it even bordered on obsession. He carried a Walther PPK pistol, the same model made famous by James Bond, a small but telling symbol of how deeply he romanticized the spy world. Hansen re-established contact with the Russians by writing to a low-level KGB officer living in Northern Virginia, someone he knew was not under surveillance. Inside the letter was another address, this one belonging to Viktor Cherkashin, a senior KGB spymaster stationed at the Soviet embassy in Washington. To prove his value, Hansen revealed the names of 3 Soviet citizens who had been recruited as informants by U.S. intelligence: Boris Yuzhin, Sergei Motorin, and Valery Martinov. The price he demanded was steep. Hansen requested $100,000 and laid out the terms for a long-term espionage relationship. He specified that future payments should be made in diamonds rather than cash, and even discussed his eventual exfiltration to Russia. Once again, he insisted on anonymity. For years, the KGB would know him only by aliases he chose for himself, most often the name Raymond Garcia. Hansen's tradecraft was methodical and precise. He provided detailed instructions on how communication would work and how dead drops would be executed. White adhesive tape placed in specific locations served as a silent signal that packages were ready for collection. Yet, his obsession with control sometimes made the system unnecessarily complex. In 1986, one package left for Hansen by his handler was hidden under the wrong corner of a bridge in a park. Hansen never found it. Despite occasional missteps, the damage was catastrophic. During his second period of espionage, Hansen passed more than 6,000 pages of classified material and 26 computer disks to the KGB. Boris Yuzhin, a KGB officer stationed at the Soviet consulate in San Francisco, was arrested and sent to a Siberian prison camp, where he spent 5 years before the collapse of the Soviet Union. Motorin and Martinov M&M to the FBI were recalled to Moscow, tried and executed. Their deaths sent shockwaves through American intelligence and marked a dark turning point in the Cold War. Beyond the loss of life, Hansen crippled U.S. intelligence operations. One of the most important programs he exposed was the Vehicle Identification System, or VIDS. Long before modern GPS tracking, the FBI had developed small tracking devices that could be covertly attached to vehicles used by Soviet intelligence officers. The system had real promise until Hansen rendered it useless by tipping off the KGB. Another major operation destroyed by Hansen was Operation Monopoly. Beginning in 1977, the FBI undertook an audacious plan to tunnel beneath the Soviet diplomatic compound in Washington, D.C., to install listening devices. The project was enormously expensive and technically complex, carried out at night under strict secrecy. Despite the effort, it produced virtually no valuable intelligence. Later, investigators learned why. Hansen had compromised the tunnel during its construction. The operation had been doomed from the start. Most damaging of all was Hansen's betrayal of the continuity of government program. First established under President Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1953, the plan was designed to ensure that the U.S. government could continue functioning after a nuclear attack. It detailed secret relocation sites for the president and key officials. By passing this information to the Soviets, Hansen handed Moscow a blueprint for decapitating the American government in the event of nuclear war. For 6 years, Hansen continued selling secrets in exchange for cash and diamonds. His duplicity extended far beyond his professional life. At home, his marriage was built on deception. Years earlier, while Robert and Bonnie were still newly married, Jack Hoshauer had been serving in Vietnam. One day, Jack received a letter from Hansen. Inside were nude photographs of Bonnie. Shocked, Jack wrote back, assuming the photos had been sent by mistake. Hansen replied coldly, saying he hoped Jack had enjoyed the moral booster. It was an early glimpse into a deeply disturbing side of his character. After Jack returned from the war, he visited the Hansen home in Virginia. On one occasion, while Bonnie was showering, Hansen invited Jack to watch his wife naked. Jack refused. But Hansen persisted. Over time, he pressured his friend into participating, first by watching through a bedroom window from the backyard deck. When cold weather made outdoor voyeurism impractical, Hansen installed a hidden camera in his bedroom. Jack could now watch from another room via a television monitor. Throughout this period, Bonnie remained unaware of the humiliation and exploitation she was subjected to by her husband. In the 1990s, Hansen escalated further, posting explicit stories about Bonnie on the internet, bizarrely using his real name. His behavior continued for years, hidden behind a facade of faith and respectability. In the late 1980s, Hansen also began frequenting a local strip club called Joanna 1819. In 1990, during one of his lunchtime visits, he met a dancer named Priscilla Sue Gailey, who performed under various stage names and was known to regulars as Hot Legs. She was in her early 30s, dark-haired and blue-eyed. Hansen quickly became infatuated. He sent a $10 bill to her dressing room after her set. They soon began talking regularly. Hansen handed her his business card and spun a story about visiting the club as part of his job, claiming he was there to catch spies. The gifts followed quickly. On their second meeting, Hansen gave Priscilla a diamond and sapphire necklace. He became her regular patron, showering her with money and expensive presents, all funded by the KGB. When she needed to practice for her driving test, he loaned her his BMW. Not long after, he bought her a champagne silver Mercedes-Benz and provided an American Express card to cover its expenses. When Hansen traveled to Hong Kong for work, he bought Priscilla a ticket and invited her to join him, traveling separately to avoid suspicion. By day, Hansen worked. By night, they dined in upscale restaurants and drank in elegant bars. Both insisted their relationship was platonic, despite repeated opportunities to make it otherwise. Whether or not that was true, the emotional intimacy was undeniable. It is possible Hansen was grooming Priscilla to assist in his espionage, perhaps as a future intermediary. Whatever his intentions, the relationship ended abruptly in December 1991. That month, the Soviet Union collapsed. The hammer and sickle were lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. The KGB was dismantled. Hansen's flow of money stopped overnight. Unsure of what intelligence services would emerge from the wreckage, he went to ground. Once again, Robert Hansen disappeared. Hansen's wish for something more exciting was soon granted. In 1978, he was detailed to the Soviet Counterintelligence Division within the FBI's New York field office. This unit sat at the sharp end of the Cold War, responsible for surveillance, recruiting sources, and dismantling Soviet spy networks operating on American soil. For Hansen, it was a dream assignment. His specific role involved building an automated national counterintelligence database for the FBI. Drawing on his background in accounting and his growing computer expertise, Hansen helped modernize how intelligence cases were tracked and cross-referenced. The position gave him a sweeping view of the espionage battlefield in New York, one of the most active hubs of Soviet bloc intelligence activity in the United States. Hansen had access to the file room and spent long hours poring over classified Soviet espionage cases. He absorbed details about tradecraft sources and operations, developing an almost romantic fascination with spying. New York, with its embassies, consulates, and constant shadow games, fed his imagination. He saw himself not merely as an analyst, but as a man standing at the center of history's great struggle. Extremely conservative and fiercely anti-communist, almost to the point of caricature, Robert Hansen appeared to embody the ideal Cold War FBI agent. Outwardly, he was climbing the bureaucratic ladder, projecting professionalism, discipline, and devout religious commitment. Privately, however, something darker was taking shape. When Hansen moved to New York, he relocated his growing family, his wife Bonnie and their 3 children, to Scarsdale in Westchester County. The area was affluent, safe, and expensive. Living on a single federal income strained the family's finances. Hansen felt the pressure acutely. The mortgage was heavy, and the cost of sending his children to private Catholic schools weighed on him constantly. Just 5 months into his New York assignment, Robert Hansen made a decision that would change everything. He chose to betray his country. 2 blocks from Grand Central Terminal stood a 22-story building housing the Amtorg Trading Corporation. Publicly, Amtorg functioned as a Soviet export agency, negotiating trade deals between American companies and the USSR. In reality, it was a well-known front used to funnel KGB and GRU intelligence officers into the United States under diplomatic cover. One day in 1979, Hansen walked through Amtorg's front doors, rode the elevator to its offices, and left an anonymous letter addressed to Soviet military intelligence. The GRU was a brazen move, but not a reckless one. Hansen knew there was no surveillance on Amtorg's main entrance. He understood the blind spots of his own organization, and he exploited them. Later, Hansen would claim that his motivation was financial. He said he only wanted extra money to supplement what he believed was an inadequate FBI salary and that he intended to exit the spy game quickly. But this first step into treachery marked the beginning of a pattern that would repeat itself again and again. This initial act launched the first of 3 distinct periods in Hansen's life during which he spied for the Soviets. Over the course of his betrayal, he would earn hundreds of thousands of dollars while systematically betraying his colleagues, American intelligence assets, and his nation. The late 1970s and early 1980s were marked by renewed hostility between the United States and the Soviet Union, a period often referred to as the Second Cold War. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 shattered détente. Proxy conflicts flared across Central America and Africa. Tensions escalated sharply, and espionage intensified on both sides. It was within this volatile climate that Hansen began supplying secrets to Moscow. During this first espionage phase, he is believed to have received roughly $21,000 from the Soviets, effectively doubling his FBI salary. The information he passed included details that allowed Soviet intelligence to evade FBI surveillance, including the revelation that the FBI had bugged a residential complex in New York frequented by Soviet officials. His most damaging disclosure during this period involved revealing the identity of one of America's most valuable intelligence assets. The informant, codenamed Top Hat, was Major General Dmitry Polyakov of the GRU. Recruited by the CIA in the mid-1960s, Polyakov provided critical intelligence for years. Hansen's betrayal contributed to Polyakov's eventual exposure. Polyakov was arrested, tried, and executed by the Soviet Union in 1986, another life erased. Ending Hansen's first period as a spy did not require elite counterintelligence work. It was his wife Bonnie who discovered the truth. One night in 1980, Robert retreated to the basement to write a letter in secret. Bonnie followed him downstairs and confronted him. Given his past infidelity, she had reason to be suspicious. When she grabbed the letter and read it, Hansen admitted he was selling information to the Russians. He claimed he was feeding them false intelligence and insisted no real harm was being done. It was a lie. Bonnie was deeply disturbed. She urged him to stop and suggested they seek guidance from their priest. The priest advised Hansen to cease all contact immediately and turn himself into the FBI. After considering the devastating consequences such a confession would bring, the priest offered an alternative. Hansen should cut off contact with the Soviets, never repeat his actions, and donate the illicit money to Mother Teresa. There is no evidence that Hansen ever gave the money to charity. He did, however, sever contact with his GRU handler by the end of 1980. For the moment, his spying came to a halt. For the next 5 years, Hansen's life appeared outwardly normal. He was promoted within the FBI, moved into supervisory roles, and gradually gained control over his finances. The mortgage burden eased. To colleagues and family alike, it seemed as though the crisis had passed. But beneath the surface, the same resentments simmered. In 1985, Robert Hansen made the choice to betray his country once again. It was remarkable that Robert Hansen emerged from the 1980s unscathed. The mid to late Cold War years, particularly 1985 and 1986, saw American intelligence rocked by scandal after scandal. One by one, U.S. double agents were exposed, arrested, and imprisoned. John Walker of the U.S. Navy, Larry Chin of the CIA, A. Ronald Pelton of the NSA. Each case revealed just how deeply American intelligence had been penetrated. Trust eroded, paranoia spread, and the damage mounted. Yet through it all, Hansen remained invisible. There were several reasons for this. His tradecraft was careful and disciplined. He remained anonymous to his handlers. And most importantly, investigators never seriously looked inward at the FBI itself. Even as the CIA continued losing agents in place, many within the intelligence community assumed the leak was coming from somewhere else. But even the most cautious spy eventually makes a mistake. The first cracks in Hansen's armor came from within his own family. His brother-in-law, Mark Walk, was also an FBI agent. Over time, Mark became aware of 3 troubling pieces of information that, when combined, raised serious suspicion. The first came in 1990, when Mark attended an FBI conference. There, he was quietly informed that an internal mole hunt was underway. The second emerged at home. Mark Oh's wife, Bonnie's sister, revealed that Bonnie had once discovered $5,000 in cash hidden inside Robert's sock drawer. The third detail was a casual remark Robert made about retiring one day to Poland. Poland, at the time, was firmly behind the Iron Curtain. Taken individually, none of these facts proved anything. Together, they painted an unsettling picture. Mark later maintained that he shared these concerns with his FBI supervisor. Whether he did or not remains disputed. In any case, no action followed. Hansen's career continued to advance. By 1991, he had been promoted to FBI unit chief. But his behavior began to grow increasingly erratic. At one point, Hansen hacked into his superior's computer system, then reported the intrusion himself, claiming he wanted to demonstrate vulnerabilities in FBI computer security. In another incident, he physically assaulted FBI agent Kimberly Lenberg. After she excused herself from a meeting and walked out of his office, Hansen followed her, pulled her to the ground, and severely injured the tendons in her arm. Lenberg received workers' compensation. Hansen faced no serious disciplinary consequences. By mid-1993, Hansen was experiencing financial strain once again. He had been cut off from Russian money for over 18 months and had begun borrowing from family members. The solution, in his mind, was obvious. He would sell secrets again. What he didn't know was how to re-establish contact. The end of the Soviet Union had dismantled the KGB. In its place emerged 2 new organizations, the SVR, responsible for foreign intelligence, and the FSB, which handled internal security. The GRU, Russia's military intelligence agency, remained intact. Hansen had worked with the GRU before, and he decided to try again. This time his approach was sloppy and reckless. After identifying a GRU officer as a potential contact, Hansen brazenly approached him in a parking lot near the officer's home. Using his familiar alias Raymond Garcia, Hansen attempted to hand over a package. The officer, completely unaware of who Hansen was, panicked, jumped into his car, and sped away. He immediately reported the encounter to his superiors. The incident was treated as a provocation. The Russian government lodged a formal protest with the U.S. State Department. When the FBI was informed that the individual had described himself as a disgruntled FBI agent, a cursory internal investigation was launched. It went nowhere. Whether Hansen was spooked by the close call or simply failed to find another opportunity, he went dark again, this time for 6 years. Throughout the mid-1990s, American intelligence agencies continued to lose assets. Millions of dollars were wasted on compromised operations. Despite the arrests of numerous spies, the leaks continued. Everyone knew there was still a mole. The FBI refused to seriously examine itself. Instead, investigators focused almost exclusively on the CIA. That fixation eventually led to the arrest of Aldrich Ames, a CIA officer in the Directorate of Operations. An alcoholic with an expensive lifestyle and a second wife who demanded luxury, Ames had turned to the KGB in 1985. His betrayals led directly to the deaths of at least 10 U.S. agents. Ames's case mirrored Hansen's in unsettling ways. Both men sold secrets for money. Both compromised the same operations and agents. When Ames received a life sentence in 1994 and his wife Rosario was convicted for aiding him, U.S. intelligence believed the nightmare was over. It wasn't. Even with Ames behind bars, agents continued to disappear. Operations failed for reasons no one could explain. The spy hunt resumed. Caught in the crossfire was Brian Kelly, a CIA officer with a previously unblemished record. Kelly's life was upended by suspicion rooted in coincidence and flawed analysis. Years earlier, an illegal Russian operative named Felix Bloch had been tipped off about a CIA investigation. Kelly had met Bloch in Paris and analysts wrongly concluded that Kelly was the source of the warning. For years, Brian Kelly lived under relentless suspicion. He was surveilled, interrogated, and eventually suspended from the CIA. His career stalled. His home life suffered. His reputation was destroyed. The toll was enormous. The truth was far simpler and far crueler. Brian Kelly was innocent. The real mole was still hiding in plain sight. Robert Hansen. Ironically, Kelly lived on the same street as Hansen. They attended the same church. While investigators chased the wrong man, Hansen remained untouched. As the CIA and FBI searched for ghosts, a former KGB officer was rising to power in Moscow. Vladimir Putin, as ascent to the Russian presidency in 2000, signaled a return to hardline intelligence priorities and a renewed focus on restoring Russian influence abroad. Against this shifting geopolitical backdrop, Robert Hansen made a decision. It was time to spy again. Hansen's first move was to make sure the past could not come back to haunt him. He began quietly searching the FBI's automated case support system for anything that could be traced back to him. Over the course of a year, he ran searches on his real name, his aliases, former addresses, dead-drop locations, and any case files that might contain incriminating references. He conducted these searches 9 separate times. Each time, he found nothing. Satisfied that the system held no digital trail leading back to him, Hansen moved forward. On October 6, 1999, Robert Hansen delivered a letter to an officer of the SVR, the Foreign Intelligence Service that had replaced the KGB. The Russians welcomed him back. Once again, he became a highly placed mole inside American intelligence. Hansen's methods were as meticulous as ever. He continued using dead drops marked with white adhesive tape, but this time he selected a new signal site, an electric utility pole in one of Washington's wealthiest neighborhoods. He understood routine, surveillance patterns, and human complacency. Those qualities worked in his favor. At the same time, the CIA and FBI were exploiting the chaos left behind by the collapse of the Soviet Union. Thousands of former KGB officers were suddenly unemployed, resentful, and vulnerable. American intelligence launched an aggressive recruitment program. The FBI called it Operation Buckeye. The CIA used the codename Racketeer. Together, the agencies were prepared to offer as much as $1 million to former Soviet intelligence officers willing to defect. One such officer was Alexander Sherbakov, codenamed Mr. Pym. After losing his position, Sherbakov turned to selling Russian art to survive. In June 2000, he was lured to New York under the pretense of meeting an American art dealer. In reality, the dealer was Bill Stout, a retired FBI agent brought back specifically to assist in recruiting former KGB officers. Once contact was established, FBI agents Deborah Smith and Mark Rockford were assigned to handle the recruitment. The process was slow and tense. Sherbakov was cautious, sometimes openly hostile. But eventually, he made a breakthrough revelation. He possessed a collection of letters exchanged between the KGB and an anonymous American mole during the Cold War. Sherbakov had taken the dossier with him when he left the KGB, anticipating it might one day be valuable. The FBI agreed to a deal. Sherbakov would return to Russia and arrange delivery of the material. In exchange, he would receive financial support and be resettled in the United States under a new identity. When the dossier arrived at FBI headquarters, one item immediately stood out. It was wrapped in a black trash bag with a handwritten note in Russian attached. The note read, "Do not open." Sherbakov had warned that the package might contain fingerprints. The FBI sent it straight to forensic analysis, knowing the results would take weeks. While they waited, analysts began translating the letters. At that time, Brian Kelly was still considered the prime suspect. But nothing in the documents pointed toward him. In fact, several recorded dead drop dates coincided with periods when Kelly was overseas, including a confirmed trip to Australia. Also included in the package was an audio cassette. The tape contained a recorded phone conversation between the American mole and his KGB handler. Investigators listened carefully. It became immediately clear the voice did not belong to Brian Kelly. Confusion spread through the task force. As agents reviewed the letters again, FBI analyst Jim Milburn noticed something strange. One letter used a derogatory term for the Japanese that had been common during World War II. Another referenced Richard M. Daley, the longtime mayor of Chicago. These details felt oddly familiar. Then it hit him. Milburn realized he had seen this mindset before. He knew exactly who wrote those letters. The mole was the man he once shared a cubicle with early in his FBI career. Robert Philip Hansen. Weeks later, the forensic results came back. The fingerprints lifted from the trash bag were a match. They belonged to veteran FBI agent Bob Hansen. The suspicion was no longer theoretical, it was confirmed. By December 2000, the FBI knew the truth. Their mole was one of their own senior agents. At the time, Hansen was serving as the FBI's liaison to the State Department. He was approaching the mandatory retirement age of 57. Although the FBI already had enough evidence to arrest him, they wanted more. A guilty plea would be easy, but catching Hansen in the act would make the case airtight. The Bureau devised a plan to lure him into exposing himself one final time. Deputy FBI Director Neil Gallagher summoned Hansen to his office with an irresistible proposal. Hansen was offered a return to FBI headquarters as a computer security expert. He would consult on IT vulnerabilities, have his mandatory retirement waived, and be promoted into the senior executive service. The offer struck directly at Hansen's ego. To him, it was long overdue recognition. He asked for time to consider it until after Christmas. That delay gave the FBI what it needed. The investigation into Brian Kelly was quietly shut down. All resources were redirected toward Hansen. The new case was codenamed Gray Day. Because Hansen had access to FBI computer systems, the entire investigation was conducted on paper. Hansen was immediately placed under round-the-clock surveillance. The FBI even purchased the house directly across the street from his home to serve as a permanent observation post. His new office at headquarters was custom-built, wired floor-to-ceiling with hidden microphones and cameras. FBI Operations Chief Rich Garcia was assigned as Hansen's supervisor and oversaw the office setup. A young recruit, 27-year-old Eric O'Neill, was brought in as Hansen's assistant. Officially, O'Neill was a law student with computer expertise. In reality, he was an experienced surveillance specialist. The trap was set. As part of his new assignment, Hansen was issued a parking pass in January 2001. Almost immediately, agents discovered that he had downloaded and printed 7 classified documents, which he stored in the trunk of his silver Ford Taurus. The car was secretly searched every day. Each discovery tightened the noose, but the FBI needed something decisive. Eric O'Neill soon delivered another breakthrough. While Hansen was momentarily distracted one afternoon, O'Neill searched his satchel and found an SD card containing a draft letter addressed to the Russians. The evidence was mounting, but investigators were focused on one object above all others. Hansen's Palm Pilot. He carried the handheld computer everywhere, tucked into his back pocket like a prized possession. He openly bragged that not even the FBI could break its encryption, which he claimed to have personally designed. The device was believed to contain communications with his handlers, schedules, and possibly future drop locations. The problem was simple: Hansen never let it out of his sight. The FBI devised a ruse. Hansen's supervisors challenged him to a shooting contest in the FBI's underground gun range, slapping $20 down on his desk. Reluctantly, Hansen agreed. He headed to the range and stayed there for nearly an hour. That hour was all the FBI needed. While Hansen was downstairs, O'Neill retrieved the Palm Pilot, along with a floppy disk and another SD card, and rushed them to the Bureau's technical team. Analysts worked quickly, copying every byte of data. The items were returned to O'Neill, who sprinted back upstairs and placed them exactly where they had been. The contents were explosive. Among the files was a letter detailing the exact date, time, and location of Hansen's next scheduled dead drop with his Russian handler. The FBI now had what it wanted. It was time to catch him in the act. The drop was planned for the afternoon of Sunday, February 18, 2001. The location was Foxstone Park, a quiet suburban area in Vienna, Virginia. The specific site code named Ellis was near a pedestrian footbridge leading from the park entrance to a jogging trail. Special agents Deborah Smith and Steve Plunkett were placed in charge of the operation. Hansen's movements were monitored through physical surveillance and wiretaps. Agents knew he planned to drive his longtime friend Jack Hoschauer to Dulles Airport around 4 p.m. that afternoon. Afterward, his family expected him home for dinner. Hansen followed the expected plan at first. After dropping off Jack at the airport, he made a sudden turn into the parking lot of the Seven Corners Shopping Center in Northern Virginia. Surveillance teams watched as Hansen opened the trunk of his car and prepared the dead drop. He wrapped the 7 classified documents and a letter to his handlers inside a black garbage bag. He then drove to Foxstone Park. From a distance, agents observed Hansen park his vehicle. He exited the car, walked to a nearby signpost, and placed a strip of white adhesive tape on it, the prearranged signal that a drop had been made. He then moved toward the footbridge and concealed the package beneath it. He turned and began walking back toward his car. SWAT teams waited nearby, heavily armed. There was concern that Hansen, who prided himself on his shooting skills and owned a large personal arsenal, might resist arrest. The order came quickly. "Take him." 2 SUVs screeched to a halt. Armed agents poured out. Hansen was taken to the ground and restrained within seconds. He did not fight back. According to one account, his only words were, "What took you so long?" Another version records him saying quietly, "So this is how it goes." The irony was sharp. In the letter he had prepared for the Russians, Hansen suspected he was under scrutiny. He described his current FBI role as a meaningless job designed to keep him away from sensitive information. He implied this might be his final exchange. Hansen was placed into a waiting vehicle, read his Miranda rights, and transported to a nearby FBI office. The long hunt was over. Back at the Hansen home, Bonnie grew increasingly worried. Robert was hours late for dinner. She left the house, heading toward Dulles Airport, but was intercepted by FBI agents along the way. She was escorted back home as a search warrant was executed. Agents turned the house upside down, searching for evidence. Bonnie was quickly cleared of any involvement in her husband's espionage, but investigators were stunned when she described an incident years earlier how she had once discovered Robert secretly writing a letter and learned he was in contact with the Russians. It suddenly became clear that Hansen's spying likely began far earlier than anyone had suspected. Before dawn the next morning, Hansen was transferred to the Orange County Jail. The FBI delayed announcing the arrest, preparing for the media storm they knew was coming. They also waited to see whether any Russian SVR officer would attempt to retrieve the dead drop. No one ever did. When the news finally broke on Tuesday, FBI Director Louis Freeh stood before the cameras. The questions came fast and sharp. How could a man responsible for catching spies be a spy himself? Hansen was denied bail, deemed a flight risk, and had all his assets frozen. He hired defense attorney Plato Caceres, the same lawyer who had represented Aldrich Ames years earlier. The shockwaves spread outward through the FBI, through the intelligence community, and through Hansen's own family. Bonnie learned of her husband's relationship with Priscilla Sugaili through newspaper reports. The truth about his voyeurism also surfaced. Jack Hoschauer later apologized to Bonnie for his role, expressing deep remorse for his actions over the years. Despite everything, betrayal, humiliation, and lies, Bonnie remained with her husband. She committed herself to praying for his soul. Hansen's arrest finally cleared Brian Kelly's name. He was reinstated at the CIA in 2001, but the damage was irreversible. He died of heart failure 10 years later. His family believed the years of suspicion and stress hastened his death. Robert Hansen's guilt was unquestionable. He knew his only option was a plea deal. On July 6, 2001, Robert Hansen entered a guilty plea in federal court. He admitted to 15 counts of espionage and conspiracy, formally acknowledging what the FBI had already proven beyond doubt. In exchange for his cooperation, federal prosecutors agreed to take the death penalty off the table. It was a decision driven less by mercy than by certainty. Hansen would never walk free again. The plea agreement sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. There would be no trial, no dramatic courtroom revelations, and no public reckoning that fully measured the damage he had done. Many within the intelligence community felt robbed of answers. Hansen was never required to testify in detail about every operation he compromised or every individual he betrayed. Much of the truth died with him in silence. Hansen was transferred to the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado ADX, Florence. Known as the most secure prison in America, it housed terrorists, cartel leaders, and the most dangerous criminals the federal system could contain. For Hansen, it would be his final address. He was placed in solitary confinement. For 23 hours a day, Hansen remained alone in a concrete cell measuring roughly 7 by 12 feet. The furnishings were minimal: a bed bolted to the floor, a desk, a stool, and a small slot in the door through which food was passed. Human contact was rare, conversation was almost non-existent. Hansen complained bitterly about the conditions. He described the isolation as psychological torture and filed repeated legal motions seeking improved treatment. None succeeded. The government argued that his history of deception and manipulation made him uniquely dangerous, even behind bars. His access to information was tightly controlled. He was prohibited from possessing a radio, television, or newspaper without approval. His correspondence was monitored. His interactions with other inmates were virtually zero. Even exercise took place alone in a small concrete enclosure under open sky. To many observers, the punishment felt fitting. Hansen's family bore a different kind of sentence. Bonnie and their 6 children were thrust into public scrutiny and shame. They lost their home, much of their financial security, and the life they had built. For years they avoided the media, retreating into privacy and faith. Bonnie continued to visit Hansen in prison. She remained devoted, insisting that forgiveness was her religious duty. To some, her loyalty seemed incomprehensible. To others it was tragic. Hansen himself appeared unmoved, rarely expressing remorse in any meaningful way. In rare interviews, Hansen portrayed himself as a victim of circumstance misunderstood, underappreciated, and unfairly punished. He minimized the consequences of his actions, even when confronted with evidence of lives lost because of his betrayals. The arrogance that defined his career never fully disappeared. Within the FBI, the reckoning was brutal. Internal reviews exposed catastrophic failures in oversight, culture, and accountability. Hansen had exploited blind trust, bureaucratic silos, and the reluctance to suspect one's own. The Bureau implemented sweeping reforms, improved internal monitoring, tighter access controls, behavioral threat assessments, and mandatory financial disclosures. Yet the damage to credibility lingered. Hansen's case joined the short list of the most devastating intelligence failures in American history, alongside Benedict Arnold, the Rosenbergs, Aldrich Ames, and the Walker family spy ring. Unlike some of those figures, Hansen had operated for decades inside the very institution responsible for stopping people like him. He had not simply slipped through the cracks. He had lived inside them. Years passed with little public attention. Hansen aged in isolation, his health slowly deteriorating. In later years, he required a walker to move within the prison. Still, he remained in solitary confinement, deemed too manipulative to be trusted in general population. On June 5, 2023, Robert Philip Hansen was found unresponsive in his cell. Prison officials later confirmed that he had died at the age of 79. No foul play was suspected. The man who had spent his life in secrecy died alone, largely forgotten by the public. The reaction was muted. There were no memorials, no official statements of sympathy from the government he had served and betrayed. For many, his death closed a long and painful chapter. For others, it reopened unanswered questions about how much he had truly revealed, and how close the country may have come to disaster because of him. Hansen left behind a legacy of distrust. His story forced American intelligence to confront an uncomfortable truth. The greatest threats are not always foreign enemies operating from afar. Sometimes they sit at the next desk. They attend the same meetings, they swear the same oaths, and they wait. In the aftermath of Hansen's death, the FBI quietly reviewed his file one last time. There were no new revelations, no hidden confessions, no final messages smuggled out of prison. What remained was a paper trail thousands of pages documenting a man who had systematically betrayed every institution that trusted him. For investigators, the most disturbing conclusion was not how Hansen spied, but how long he got away with it. For more than 22 years, he lived a double life in plain sight. He passed background checks. He received promotions. He lectured colleagues on ethics and security. He warned others about the dangers of espionage while committing it himself. At no point did the system designed to catch traitors stop him. Hansen's case reshaped counterintelligence doctrine in the United States. After his arrest, the FBI and CIA adopted a fundamental shift in mindset. Trust was no longer enough. Continuous evaluation replaced periodic clearance reviews. Digital footprints, behavioral anomalies, unexplained wealth, and access patterns became permanent points of scrutiny. The idea that loyalty could be assumed was permanently abandoned. Training programs began using Hansen as a case study, not as a villain from the outside, but as a threat from within. New agents were taught to recognize that ideology, money, ego, and resentment could coexist inside the same person. Hansen had not fit a single stereotype. That was precisely why he succeeded. His story also altered how intelligence agencies viewed motivation. Hansen was not driven by desperation alone. He was not an addict, nor a man living beyond his means for most of his career. What truly fueled him was grievance. He believed he was smarter than his superiors, undervalued by the institution, and entitled to recognition he never received. The money mattered, but the validation mattered more. In that sense, Hansen represented a uniquely dangerous archetype, the insider who feels wronged. The human cost of his actions remained harder to measure. Families in Russia were never publicly acknowledged. The American agents who died because of his betrayals were remembered in classified memorials and quiet ceremonies. Careers were destroyed. Operations collapsed. Decades of work vanished overnight. Those losses never appeared on a balance sheet. Brian Kelly's story became a cautionary tale of its own, how fear and flawed assumptions can ruin innocent lives. His name was cleared, but his life was never restored. For many within the intelligence community, that failure was as painful as Hansen's crimes themselves. Bonnie Hansen lived out her remaining years away from the spotlight. She never gave interviews. She never sought sympathy. Friends said she believed silence was her final duty to her faith, to her children, and to the truth she could not undo. Hansen's children carried a burden they did not choose. Some changed their names. Others retreated entirely from public life. Their father's actions followed them like a shadow, long after his imprisonment and death. Today, Robert Hansen is remembered less as a man and more as a warning. A reminder that institutions can be compromised not by force but by familiarity, that loyalty can be faked. That danger does not always announce itself with violence or ideology. Sometimes it wears a badge, carries a briefcase, and goes home to dinner every night. The Cold War ended. The Soviet Union collapsed. But the lessons of espionage did not disappear with them. If anything, they became more relevant. Because in every system built on trust, there exists a quiet vulnerability, the assumption that the people inside it are who they claim to be. Hansen understood that weakness better than anyone. And he exploited it to the very end.